The marble floor of the River Street Inn lobby gleamed beneath my shoes as I crossed toward the private dining room. Each step sent a dull vibration through my chest that had nothing to do with the weight of my footfall. I am Franklin Mercer, 61 years old, owner of Mercer Maritime and Properties, a shipping and coastal real estate company my grandfather carved out of the Savannah docks with his bare hands before the Second World War. On paper, I was worth $50 million. In that moment, walking past the antique gas lamps and the faint scent of river water drifting through the cracked windows, I felt worth less than the loose change rattling in a deckhand's pocket. The pain had returned. A slow, grinding pressure behind my sternum, as though an invisible hand had reached inside my ribcage and was quietly squeezing my heart like a wet sponge. 6 months ago, the episodes were rare. A flutter here, a moment of breathlessness there. My physician called it stress. My body called it something else entirely, something darker that I did not yet have a name for. I pushed through the carved oak doors of the Oglethorpe room. The air smelled of old wood, melted candle wax, and the faintest trace of shrimp and grits from the kitchen below. Across the white linen tablecloth sat Marcus Whitley. At 57, Marcus carried the permanent impatience of a man who believed every second not spent making money was a second wasted. The $5 million port lease agreement sitting between us represented 18 months of negotiation compressed into 40 pages. "Franklin, you are 11 minutes late," Marcus said without looking up. "I do not pay my lawyers $400 an hour to watch me wait." I lowered myself into the chair, careful to keep my movements controlled. If I let my shoulders sag even slightly, Marcus would smell weakness the way a shark smells blood in open water. "Traffic on Bay Street," I replied. "The tourists forget how to drive every February." It was a lie. I had been sitting in my car for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel while my heart performed its strange and terrifying rhythm, waiting for the dizziness to pass, waiting for the world to stop tilting like a ship caught broadside by a rogue wave. Marcus slid the contract across the table. I reached for my fountain pen. The gold nib caught the chandelier light as I positioned it above the signature line on page 37. My hand trembled, not the subtle tremor of an older man with tired muscles. The pen vibrated above the paper as though the ink itself was afraid to fall. The numbers blurred, sharpened, then blurred again. $5 million. 18 months of work, and my hand refused to cooperate. "Franklin," Marcus said, leaning forward. "You have been staring at that line for 2 minutes. Is there a problem with the terms?" "Just the lighting, Marcus. These old chandeliers were built for atmosphere, not for reading contracts." I set the pen down with exaggerated care. The truth was simpler and far more frightening. For 30 years, Franklin Mercer never left a table without a signed contract. Tonight, I could not even hold the pen. I excused myself and stood slowly, steadying myself against the table's edge before releasing my grip. The dining room stretched around me in soft focus, crystal glasses, white tablecloths, all of it distant, as though I were watching through the porthole of a sinking ship. I turned left out of the Oglethorpe room, intending to find the restroom. But the hallway seemed to elongate, the antique wallpaper stretching like the surface of disturbed water. I pressed my palm against the wall for balance. The plaster felt cool and damp beneath my fingers. I kept walking, past the concierge alcove, past the door marked "Staff Only," until polished hardwood gave way to scuffed industrial tile. The air changed. The elegant fragrance of lilies and furniture polish vanished, replaced by the sharp bite of industrial bleach and the humid warmth of a commercial laundry room running behind the walls. I had wandered into the service corridor, the hidden skeleton behind the inn's beautiful face. I should have turned back. Instead, I kept walking. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a faint electrical hum that matched the ringing in my ears. And then I saw her. At the far end of the corridor, a woman knelt on the wet tile floor outside the service bathroom. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the grout with a rag so thin I could see her knuckles through the fabric. Her shoulders curved inward under exhaustion, and beneath the oversized gray uniform hanging from her frame like a sail from a broken mast, the unmistakable curve of a swollen belly pressed against the cold floor. 8 months pregnant. Scrubbing bathroom tiles at 7:30 on a Thursday evening. Something about the angle of her jaw stopped me. The way her dark hair fell across her cheek. The particular tilt of her head as she pressed the back of her wrist against her forehead. I had seen that gesture 1,000 times. At Sunday dinners. At company Christmas parties. At the kitchen table in my son's house, where she would push her hair back with exactly that motion before launching into a sharp analysis of a quarterly report. My blood turned to ice. The dizziness vanished, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade against my throat. She lifted her head. The sponge slipped from her trembling fingers and landed on the wet tile with a soft, defeated sound. Her eyes met mine. Hollow, terrified, sunken into dark circles so deep they looked like bruises. Iris Mercer. 26 years old. My daughter-in-law. The woman my son Bennett had sworn, 7 months ago, had abandoned their marriage and run away with a foreign sailor. The woman I had grieved for. The woman I had cursed for breaking my son's heart. She was here. Not in Europe living a glamorous new life. Not on a yacht with a mysterious lover. She was on her knees, 8 months pregnant, scrubbing the floors of a hotel I had personally invested in 12 years ago. Neither of us moved. The fluorescent light buzzed. The kitchen clattered through the walls. The silence between us stretched tight, as an anchor line about to snap. Then Iris scrambled to her feet. Her legs buckled once beneath the weight of her belly before she caught herself against the doorframe. Her mouth opened, but only a small, strangled gasp escaped. A sound that broke something ancient and protective deep inside my chest. She turned and ran. A desperate, uneven shuffle toward the kitchen doors. Each step looked painful. Each step cost her something she could not afford to spend. I did not think. I did not calculate. I did not weigh the $5 million contract against the ghost disappearing down that corridor. I left Marcus Whitley and his $5 million sitting on a tablecloth that suddenly meant nothing, and I followed her into the dark. The kitchen doors slammed against the wall with a sound like a pistol shot. The elegant quiet of the dining room vanished, swallowed by humid heat. The violent hiss of steam and the metallic clang of pans striking iron burners. I charged through without slowing. Line cooks in stained jackets jumped aside, their startled faces blurring beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The head chef opened his mouth to protest, but something in my expression made him step back without a word. My eyes swept the stainless steel jungle of prep stations and industrial ovens. The air was thick with grease, garlic, and the sharp sting of sanitizer. Then I saw her. In the far corner beside the walk-in cooler, Iris stood hunched against the cold metal wall, her face buried in her trembling hands. Her thin uniform was dark with sweat along her spine, and her breathing came in short, ragged bursts. "Iris," I said quietly. "Look at me." She flinched at my voice, her head snapping up. Her eyes darted across the kitchen with the frantic alertness of a trapped animal. Without a word, she grabbed my sleeve and pulled me down a narrow hallway near the dry storage room. A dim, cramped passage that smelled of burnt garlic, old grease, and overheated metal. The kitchen noise continued behind the wall, muffled now, like waves heard from inside a ship's hull. Iris pressed herself into the corner where the hallway met a stack of supply crates. The single overhead bulb cast weak yellow light that deepened the shadows beneath her eyes into dark hollows. "You should not have followed me," she whispered. Her voice was thin and fractured. "If Bennett finds out you saw me, he will take him." Her hands moved to her belly, wrapping around it like arms shielding a life raft from a storm. "Take who?" I asked. My pulse hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "Bennett told the family, you ran away, Iris. He said you left with a foreign sailor 7 months ago." She let out a broken sound, half laugh and half sob. The bitterness cut deeper than any boardroom insult I had ever received. "There was no sailor, Franklin. There was never anyone else. The words poured out of her like water through a cracked hull. He told me he would have me declared a drug addict. He had a doctor willing to sign papers saying I was unstable. He said if I did not leave quietly, he would make sure I never held my own child. I stood motionless. The cold metal of a supply shelf pressed against my shoulder blade as her words stripped away 7 months of lies. My son had not been abandoned. He had been the one holding the knife. Iris explained that Vivian Cross had not appeared after she left. Vivian had already been living in the house. Months before Iris fled, Vivian moved into the guest bedroom under the excuse of helping Bennett develop a medical supply business. Iris described how Vivian wore her clothes while she was still under that roof. How Vivian sat in her chair, used her kitchen, moved through her home, as though Iris were already a ghost. She wore my anniversary necklace, Iris whispered, her teeth chattering. She wore it to dinner in our house, while I sat across the table. And Bennett laughed. My jaw tightened until the muscles in my neck ached. Vivian Cross, 31 years old, a former registered nurse whose license had been revoked for stealing controlled medications from a hospital pharmacy. Bennett had mentioned her once as a business consultant. I never questioned it. I had been too busy running Mercer Maritime to investigate who was living under my son's roof. How does a man who inspects every rivet on a ship's hull fail to notice the rot inside his own family? Iris looked up at me. The fluorescent bulb flickered, and in that brief strobe I saw something beyond fear in her eyes. It was certainty, the deep conviction of a woman who had survived 7 months on the knowledge that she was right and the world had been lied to. Then she said it. 5 words that split my life into before and after, the way a fault line splits the earth beneath a city that believed its ground was solid. They are killing you, Franklin. The hallway fell silent. Even the kitchen seemed to hold its breath. She explained in broken whispers. Vivian was not just living in the house. She was administering a heart medication called digoxin, in doses high enough to poison a healthy heart into slow failure. She mixed it into Franklin's food and into the herbal tea Bennett brought to his study every evening with that concerned, dutiful smile. The chest pains, the dizziness, the episodes that struck without warning and left me gasping in parking garages and boardrooms. They were never symptoms of age. They were my son's signature on my death certificate, written 1 poisoned meal at a time. Vivian told Bennett it would look natural. Iris continued, barely audible above the hum of the refrigeration unit. She said nobody would question an older man with a stressful career having a heart attack. She called it the retirement plan. My own son. The boy I taught to tie a bowline knot on the deck of the Magnolia when he was 6. The boy I carried on my shoulders through Savannah Port, naming every ship and every flag. That boy was stirring my grave into my evening tea. I reached for the wall. The cold metal felt like the only honest thing left in my world. Then Iris's knees buckled. Her body folded forward like a sail collapsing when the wind dies. I caught her before she hit the concrete. She weighed almost nothing beneath her pregnancy. A terrifying lightness that told me she had not eaten a real meal in days. Her pulse fluttered against my fingers like a moth trapped behind glass. Promise me, she murmured, her eyelids dropping. Do not let him take my son. Her head fell against my shoulder. In that narrow hallway, surrounded by the smell of old grease and bleach, holding the woman my son had tried to erase, I felt the last anchor of my old life snap free from the seafloor. The man who entered the River Street Inn that evening was a businessman with a contract to sign. The man standing in this hallway was something else. A grandfather who had just discovered that the monster he needed to fight carried his own blood. I did not call an ambulance. An ambulance meant paperwork. Paperwork meant a name in a system. And a name in a system meant Bennett would find her before sunrise. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed the only number I trusted more than my own heartbeat. Willis, I said. My voice came out rough, scraped raw by the last 30 minutes. Service entrance. River Street Inn. Now. No questions. Captain Jeremiah Willis had been my closest friend for 35 years. At 68, he carried the weathered calm of a man who had spent most of his life reading the moods of the Atlantic Ocean and adjusting his sails accordingly. He did not ask why I was calling from a hotel kitchen at 8:15 on a Thursday night. He did not ask why my voice sounded like it belonged to a man who had just watched his own house burn down. He simply said, 6 minutes, and hung up. I carried Iris through the service corridor, past the laundry room where industrial dryers roared like furnaces, and out through the heavy metal door that opened into the narrow alley behind the inn. The February night air hit my face like a wall of cold salt. The Savannah River moved somewhere in the darkness beyond the cobblestone street, its ancient current carrying the faint smell of mud, diesel, and the memory of 1,000 ships that had passed through this port since before I was born. Iris stirred against my chest. She weighed almost nothing. Willis was right on time. His old blue pickup truck swung around the corner with its headlights off, the engine rumbling low like a tugboat idling in harbor. He stepped out, took one look at the unconscious pregnant woman in my arms, and opened the rear door without a word. I laid Iris across the bench seat as gently as I could. Her skin was cold and clammy. Her pulse still fluttered weakly beneath my fingers. She weighs less than a sailbag, Franklin, Willis said quietly as he climbed behind the wheel. His voice carried no judgment, only a deep and practiced concern. Where are we going? Dr. Haskell, I replied. The private clinic on Abercorn, not the hospital. The hospital has too many eyes. Willis pulled away from the curb and drove through the dark streets of Savannah with the quiet efficiency of a man navigating a channel he had memorized decades ago. Spanish moss hung from the live oaks lining the avenue like curtains of gray lace, swaying gently in the cold breeze. The gas lamps along the squares cast soft amber pools of light on the sidewalks, but tonight their warmth felt like a lie. I sat in the back seat holding Iris's hand. Her fingers were ice cold. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of the Magnolia, our flagship vessel, resting at her berth in the port. Her white hull glowed faintly under the dock lights. A ghost ship waiting for orders that would not come tonight. Dr. Lorraine Haskell's private clinic occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian townhouse on Abercorn Street. At 54, Lorraine was the kind of physician who treated her patients like family members she happened to have medical degrees for. She met us at the side entrance wearing scrubs and reading glasses, her gray hair pulled into a hasty knot. One look at Iris, and the professional calm on her face tightened into something sharper. Get her inside, she said. Now. The examination took 40 minutes. I sat in the narrow waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and old magazines, listening to the muffled sounds of medical equipment through the wall. Willis sat beside me, his large, weathered hands resting on his knees. He did not ask questions. He simply waited, the way he had waited through storms and engine failures and every other crisis the sea had thrown at us over 3 decades. When Lorraine finally emerged, her expression made my stomach drop. The baby is strong, she said, pulling off her latex gloves. A real fighter. But his mother is in serious trouble. Severe dehydration, stage 2 anemia, extreme exhaustion and malnutrition. She has not had a proper meal in weeks. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Franklin, another month of this, and you would be planning 2 funerals instead of a birth. The words landed like an anchor, dropped from a height. 2 funerals. My grandson and his mother. While I had been eating dinner at the River Street Inn and worrying about a $5 million contract, the woman carrying my grandchild had been starving 3 miles away. Lorraine stabilized Iris with intravenous fluids and nutrients, then gave me a list of medications and dietary requirements that filled an entire page. I folded the paper carefully and placed it inside my jacket, next to the heart that someone was trying to stop. There was only one place I could take her, a place that existed outside the official records of Mercer Maritime and Properties, a small coastal cottage on Tybee Island that I had purchased 30 years ago with cash, long before the company went digital. It was the house where my late wife Catherine and I had spent our anniversaries. The house where Bennett had taken his first steps on the sandy porch. It was not listed under any corporate filing. It was mine alone, a secret harbor I had kept, for reasons I never fully understood until tonight. Willis drove us across the bridge to Tybee in silence. The marsh grass on either side of the highway shimmered silver under the moonlight, and the salt air grew stronger with every mile. When we pulled into the crushed shell driveway, the cottage sat dark and patient beneath the live oaks, waiting as though it had always known this moment would come. I helped Iris inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, something shifted in her posture. The rigid terror that had locked her shoulders for 7 months seemed to loosen, just slightly, as the scent of salt air and old pine walls wrapped around her. I guided her to the bedroom where Catherine's quilt still covered the mattress. She lowered herself onto it slowly, her hands never leaving her belly. "It smells like the ocean," she whispered. "It smells like safety." I pulled the quilt up to her shoulders and stood there for a moment, watching the fear drain from her face as sleep finally took hold. Through the window, the Tybee lighthouse blinked its steady rhythm across the dark water, a signal that had guided sailors home for 200 years. Tonight, it was guiding me. I stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards creaked beneath my weight. The sound of the waves rolling against the shore filled the night air with a rhythm as old as the earth itself. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to breathe. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen glowed, pale blue in the darkness. A text message from Bennett. "How is the old ticker tonight, Dad? Vivian made you a special batch of tea. Do not forget to drink it before bed." I stared at the words. They were not concern. They were a progress report. A quiet check on the slow execution of the man who gave him life. I looked out at the dark ocean. Somewhere beneath those waves, the foundation of everything I had built was cracking. But above the surface, the lighthouse kept turning. And so would I. The morning sun hit the glass wall of Bennett's penthouse like a surgical light. I stood outside the front door at 7:45, my finger on the brushed steel doorbell. I had not slept. The image of Iris collapsing played on a loop every time I closed my eyes. But exhaustion had sharpened something inside me rather than dulling it. The way a whetstone sharpens a blade by grinding away everything that is not edge. The buzzer echoed inside. Footsteps approached. The door swung open. Bennett Mercer stood there, in a designer silk robe, holding a porcelain cup of espresso. At 34, my son had the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned whether the world owed him something. He looked less concerned by my presence than mildly inconvenienced. "Dad," he said, raising one eyebrow. "What are you doing here this early?" He studied my face with practiced concern. "You look awful. Another episode? You should be home resting." There it was. The caring son worried about his father's health. For months I had accepted those words. Now they sounded like stage directions in a murder plot. I stepped past him without invitation. The penthouse overlooked Forsyth Park. White marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, every surface polished and immaculate. Yet the space felt lifeless, as though warmth had never existed here. My eyes cataloged details the way I inspected a ship before service. 2 espresso cups on the kitchen island. Elegant heels discarded near the sofa. The bitter scent of coffee alongside something floral that did not belong to my son. A woman sat on the leather sectional with the ease of someone who had lived here a long time. She wore a silk robe I recognized instantly. Iris's robe. The dove-gray one, with embroidered initials. The one Iris unwrapped on her birthday 2 years ago, her face bright with surprise. Vivian Cross. 31 years old. She looked up with a smile, so perfectly calibrated, it could have been designed by an engineer. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," she said sweetly. Still standing, I see. Still standing. As though my existence were an inconvenience she was patiently waiting to resolve. She drank from a ceramic mug I recognized as Iris's favorite. The one with the small chip Iris refused to throw away, because her mother had given it to her. This woman was not just living in my daughter-in-law's home. She was wearing her skin. The sight of her in Iris's robe, drinking from Iris's cup, sent a wave of cold fury through me that burned away the last traces of the father who wanted to believe his son was redeemable. Bennett followed me inside. Espresso balanced casually in one hand. "I have something for you, Dad," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the kitchen island. "I did not want to burden you, especially with your health. But your precious Iris did not just run away. She robbed us before she disappeared." He tapped the envelope. "Fake vendor accounts. Phantom invoices. It is all documented." I looked at the envelope, then at my son. He stood there confidently handing me fabricated evidence, fully expecting me to be too weak or too medicated to recognize the lie. Something ancient inside me quietly died. 34 years of paternal loyalty evaporated in a single breath. I did not open the envelope. If Iris truly robbed Mercer Maritime Bennett, then you are a far more incompetent vice president than I ever feared, I said. My voice carried a precision that surprised even me. A freelance accountant siphoning funds under your direct supervision? By your own logic, you failed to protect the firm. His expression flickered. A hairline fracture in the mask. "Consider yourself terminated as vice president of Mercer Maritime," I continued, pulling out my phone. "Effective immediately. For gross negligence in protecting corporate assets." Your words, not mine. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Behind him, Vivian's charm vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of a woman recalculating her position on a board that had just lost its most valuable piece. I sent a pre-drafted authorization to my chief financial officer. Corporate accounts frozen. Personal trust suspended. Company credit cards canceled. You have 24 hours to produce real proof, not forgeries, or you will discover how fast a Mercer becomes a stranger to his own name. The transformation was immediate. The caring mask shattered like plaster crumbling off a rotten wall. Bennett's face contorted. The veins in his neck bulged like dock ropes, pulled to breaking point. "That money is mine by blood," he screamed, his voice cracking raw and ugly. "It is my legacy. You cannot take what is already mine." I turned my back and walked toward the door. Vivian remained motionless on the sofa, a predator weighing the value of a man whose accounts had just been emptied. I reached the handle. My hand was steady. A porcelain cup exploded against the wall behind me. The crack of breaking ceramic echoed like a starter pistol. Then Bennett's voice followed me through the heavy door, each word vibrating in the hallway like a curse. "Your heart will not last the winter, old man. And when it stops, everything you built becomes mine. I know about Tybee Island, Dad. Did you think I would not check your property records?" The elevator doors closed on his screaming. I stood in the mirrored silence, watching my reflection. The man looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear, and his hands, for the first time in months, were perfectly still. Bennett knew about Tybee. I had to move Iris before nightfall. But first I needed something stronger than instinct. I needed the proof that my own blood was trying to stop my heart. I drove to Memorial Health alone. No Willis. No driver. No one who could later be asked where Franklin Mercer went on a Friday morning when he should have been reviewing port contracts. The parking garage beneath the hospital smelled of wet concrete and exhaust. I sat in the car for 3 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, while a fresh wave of chest pain rolled through me like a slow tide, dragging sand from under my feet. Dr. Nathan Cross kept his cardiology practice on the 4th floor. At 56, Nathan had the lean, precise manner of a man who spent his career reading the secret language of the human heart. I had known him for 15 years. He had treated my wife Catherine during her final illness, and he was one of the few men in Savannah whose loyalty I trusted without reservation. I should clarify that Nathan shared a surname with Vivian Cross by pure coincidence. There was no blood between them. The irony of the name was not lost on me. I sat on the examination table under the cold fluorescent lights while Nathan wrapped the tourniquet around my upper arm. The rubber squeezed tight. He tapped the vein inside my elbow with 2 practiced fingers and slid the needle in. I watched the blood begin to fill the collection vial. It looked wrong. The color was darker than it should have been, sluggish and thick, like engine oil drained from a machine that had been running too long without maintenance. Nathan noticed it too. His brow furrowed as he held the vial up to the light. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened in a way I recognized. It was the same expression he wore when he told me Catherine's cancer had spread. While we waited for the lab results, he examined the bruises along my forearms. I had noticed them weeks ago, but dismissed them as the normal marks of an aging body. Nathan traced them with a gloved finger, pressing gently. His silence was louder than any diagnosis. The results came back in 40 minutes. Nathan sat across from me, the blue glow of his computer screen reflecting off his glasses. He read the numbers twice before he spoke. "Franklin, your blood contains dangerously elevated levels of digoxin." He paused, choosing his next words with the care of a man defusing a bomb. "This is a cardiac glycoside. In controlled doses, it regulates heart rhythm. At the concentration I am seeing in your bloodstream, it is a systematic poison. Someone has been administering this to you in repeated small doses over an extended period. Months, based on the tissue accumulation." The room seemed to contract around me. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The antiseptic smell of the examination room suddenly felt suffocating. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded distant, as though it belonged to someone else. "How long before it finishes the job?" Nathan removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "At this concentration, without intervention, your heart will develop a fatal arrhythmia within 3 to 4 weeks. It will most likely happen during sleep." He looked at me directly. "You will simply not wake up one morning. And to any coroner performing a routine examination, it will look exactly like natural heart failure in a 61-year-old man with a stressful career." The precision of the plan took my breath away. Not its cruelty. I had already absorbed that in the hallway behind the River Street Inn. But its elegance. Vivian Cross had designed my death to be invisible. A quiet cardiac event in the middle of the night. No autopsy flags. No toxicology screens. Just another old man whose heart gave out. The obituary would practically write itself. "Someone is turning your heart into a ticking bomb, Franklin," Nathan said quietly. "You should not even be standing right now. The fact that you are tells me your body has been fighting this harder than most men half your age could manage. Then they have made one mistake, Nathan," I replied. My voice came out as a cold, flat rasp that I barely recognized. "They left me enough life to bury them." Nathan studied me for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a prescription pad. He began writing with the focused intensity of a man constructing a battle plan rather than a medical prescription. He explained the detoxification protocol. A chelating agent that would bind to the digoxin molecules and flush them from my system over a period of weeks. The medication would be disguised inside standard multivitamin capsules. To anyone watching, I would simply be taking my daily supplements. The pills would taste bitter, chalky, medicinal. But each one would be pulling me back from the edge of the grave my son had been digging. "Take one every morning," Nathan instructed. "Do not skip a day." "And Franklin," he added, his voice dropping lower, "this protocol will work, but it will take time. During that time, your symptoms will fluctuate. Some days, you will feel stronger. Other days, the old weakness will return. You need to be prepared for that." I took the prescription and folded it carefully into my jacket pocket. The paper felt strangely light for something that carried the weight of my survival. I stood up from the examination table. My legs felt unsteady, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. The fog that had clouded my thinking, the confusion I had blamed on aging, the moments where words slipped away from me mid-sentence, all of it suddenly made sense. It was never decline. It was sabotage. Nathan walked me to the door of his office. He placed one hand on my shoulder. The weight of it felt honest and solid, like a mooring line holding a ship to the dock in rough weather. "Be careful," he said. "Whoever is doing this understands pharmacology. They know exactly how to keep you on the edge without pushing you over too soon. That takes knowledge and patience. You are not dealing with amateurs." I nodded. Then I stepped into the elevator and descended to the parking garage. The concrete walls pressed close around me as I walked toward my car. My footsteps echoed in the empty structure, like the ticking of a clock counting down the weeks I had left. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. Then I dialed Willis. "Meet me at the port," I said. "Dock 7. The Magnolia. There is something I need you to look at. Some paperwork that does not add up." I ended the call and sat behind the wheel. Through the windshield, the gray concrete ceiling of the garage stretched overhead like the lid of a coffin. But I was no longer the man lying inside it waiting for the nails. I was the man who had just found the hammer. Dock 7 sat at the far end of the Savannah port, where the commercial berths gave way to the older wooden piers that my grandfather had built with his own hands in 1941. The Magnolia rested in her slip like a sleeping giant. Her white hull caught the late afternoon light, and the faint creak of her mooring lines played a rhythm I had known since childhood. This ship was not just a vessel. She was the physical heartbeat of the Mercer legacy. My grandfather had christened the original Magnolia with a bottle of cheap champagne and a prayer. My father had rebuilt her twice. I had restored her a third time after Hurricane Matthew tried to drag her to the bottom of the river. Captain Willis was waiting on the foredeck. He stood with his arms crossed, his weathered face set in an expression I had never seen before. In 35 years of friendship, through storms that bent steel and business deals that broke weaker men, Jeremiah Willis had never once looked afraid. Today he looked afraid. He did not greet me. He simply held out a thick folder of documents. The paper felt heavy in my hands, heavier than it should have been for what appeared to be routine maritime insurance filings. "Start with page 6, Willis said quietly. I opened the folder. Page 6 contained a lien notification from a financial institution I did not recognize. The name on the letterhead was Atlantic Coastal Lending, a company that sounded legitimate but carried the faint odor of something operating just outside the boundaries of the law. The document stated that all 4 vessels in the Mercer Maritime Fleet had been pledged as collateral against a series of short-term, high-interest loans totaling $3.2 million. I read the number twice. $3.2 million. The figure sat on the page like a bullet hole in a ship's hull. I turned to the next page. Loan origination records. Payment schedules. Default notices. Each document bore Bennett's signature. Bold and careless. The handwriting of a man who signed without reading because he assumed the consequences would never reach him. Willis stepped closer. His voice dropped to a register I had only heard him use during genuine emergencies at sea. I found it 3 days ago when I was renewing the hull insurance on the Magnolia, he said. The underwriter flagged a secondary lien I had never seen before. I pulled the records on the other 3 vessels. Same thing. All 4 ships, Franklin. Every hull in the fleet. He paused. The silence between us was filled only by the low groan of the mooring lines and the distant cry of gulls circling the river. He gambled it. Willis continued. His voice was steady, but I could hear the controlled fury beneath it, like an engine running hot. Every dollar went to an online poker platform registered in Malta. $3.2 million in 14 months. He did not just steal your ships, Franklin. He gambled away your father's legacy and your grandfather's name. 3 generations lost on a poker website. I stood on the deck of the Magnolia holding the folder and felt the wood beneath my feet shift slightly with the current. The same deck where I had taught Bennett to tie a bowline when he was 6. The same deck where my father had shown me how to read the tide by watching the way the water moved against the pilings. 3 generations of Mercer men had stood on this wood, and my son had signed it all away between hands of virtual cards on a screen. How does a man who spent his life building ships discover that his own son has been sinking them? Willis watched me without speaking. He had the patience of a man who understood that some storms could not be outrun. They had to be endured. I walked to the bow of the Magnolia and sat down on the wooden bench my father had installed 40 years ago. The varnish was cracked and faded. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. I placed the folder beside me and looked out across the Savannah River. The water moved slowly, carrying the reflection of cargo cranes and church steeples in long, rippling streaks of color. I cried. I had not cried since Catherine's funeral. I had not cried when my doctor told me my chest pains might be serious. I had not cried when Iris collapsed in my arms the night before. But sitting on that bench, holding the proof that my son had gambled away everything my family had spent 80 years building, I broke. The tears came silently. They rolled down my face and fell onto the weathered wood of the deck, darkening the grain, the way rain darkens the planks of a ship that has been at sea too long. Willis did not try to comfort me. He simply stood nearby with his back turned toward the river, giving me the privacy to fall apart without an audience. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in months. The crying lasted less than 5 minutes. When it stopped, something else took its place. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Something with a keel and a rudder. A structure I could steer. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and stood up. The river stretched out before me, wide and slow and patient. It had carried ships for 300 years. It would carry mine a little longer. I built this harbor, I said quietly. My voice was raw, but steady. And I will not let my son sink it. Willis turned around. He studied my face for a moment, reading it the way he read weather patterns before a crossing. Then he nodded once. The simple, decisive nod of a man who had just received his orders and intended to follow them. I picked up the folder and tucked it inside my jacket next to the prescription from Dr. Cross. 2 pieces of paper. One proved my son was poisoning my blood. The other proved he was dismantling my legacy. Together they weighed less than a pound. Together they carried the weight of everything I had left to fight for. I needed someone who could trace the money. Not a regular accountant. I needed someone who could follow a dollar through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts the way a bloodhound follows a scent through a swamp. I needed Gloria Vance. I pulled out my phone and dialed her office. "Gloria," I said when she answered. "It is Franklin Mercer. I need you to find 750,000 reasons why my son should be in prison. Can you start tomorrow?" The line was quiet for 2 seconds. Then her voice came back, sharp and professional. "I will clear my calendar. Bring everything you have." Gloria Vance's office occupied a narrow room above a bookshop on Broughton Street. The space smelled of old paper, printer ink, and the faint residue of black coffee that had been reheated too many times. At 52, Gloria had the sharp, humorless focus of a woman who had spent 3 decades finding money in places it had no right to be. She was the best forensic accountant in Savannah, possibly in the entire state of Georgia, and she had a reputation for being impossible to lie to. I arrived at 9 the following morning carrying the folder Willis had given me, the toxicology report from Dr. Cross, and the manila envelope of fabricated evidence Bennett had tried to hand me at his penthouse. Gloria did not offer me coffee or small talk. She pointed to a chair, took the documents from my hands, and began reading before I had finished sitting down. For 2 hours I watched her work. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with a relentless clicking rhythm that filled the small room like the ticking of a machine designed to take things apart. The blue glow of her monitor reflected off her reading glasses as she cross-referenced bank statements, corporate filings, and transaction records I had brought from Mercer Maritime's financial archives. She spoke only when she found something. Each discovery landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The first stone fell at 10:15. Gloria turned her screen toward me and pointed to a series of wire transfers originating from 3 separate vendor accounts. The accounts belonged to companies I had never heard of. Coastal Heritage Consulting, Palmetto Bridge Holdings, Lowcountry Asset Management. All three were registered in the state of Delaware under the maiden name of Vivian Cross. $890,000, Gloria said flatly. Moved across 14 months through these three shells. The money entered each company as payments for consulting services that were never performed. From there, it was routed into a single offshore account in the Cayman Islands. She tapped the screen. The beneficiary signature on the offshore account is Vivian Cross. I stared at the number. $890,000. Nearly $1 million taken from the company my grandfather had built with his bare hands, funneled through phantom businesses into an island bank account controlled by the woman who was simultaneously poisoning my tea. Gloria continued without pause. She pulled up a second set of documents. These were internal corporate filings, bearing my digital signature. Authorizations for fund transfers, changes to account access privileges, amendments to vendor agreements. Each one had been executed during a period when I was experiencing what I now understood to be digoxin-induced episodes. The dates aligned perfectly. Every time Vivian's poison knocked me unconscious or left me too disoriented to function, Bennett had used those hours to access my tablet and authorize transactions with my biometric login. He waited for you to go down, Gloria said, her voice carrying the clinical detachment of a surgeon describing a wound. Then he used your own fingerprint to sign the checks. Your unconscious body was his rubber stamp. The image her words created made my stomach turn. My son sitting beside my bed, waiting for my eyes to close, then pressing my limp thumb against a screen to authorize the theft of my own fortune. The intimacy of the betrayal was almost worse than the poison itself. He had turned my helplessness into a tool, but Gloria was not finished. She opened a new file on her screen, and the color drained from her face. For the first time since I had entered her office, she stopped typing. Franklin, she said slowly. Look at this. The document on the screen was an amendment to my personal life insurance policy, filed 6 weeks ago. My accidental death benefit had been increased from $2 million to $12 million. The policy contained a specific rider that made the full amount payable in the event of, and here the language was so precise it made my skin crawl, an accidental cardiac event resulting in death during sleep. They did not just want me dead. They wanted my death to look like a quiet act of nature. A tired old man whose heart gave out in the night. $12 million for a funeral that nobody would question. I sat in the stale air of Gloria's office and felt the walls close in around me like the bulkheads of a flooding ship. 12 million. The number was not just a payout. It was the price tag my son had placed on my life. Gloria kept digging. 20 minutes later, she found that Vivian had already attempted to initiate a preliminary claim on the policy using a forged medical certificate. The document stated that Franklin Mercer had been diagnosed with terminal congestive heart failure by a Dr. Raymond Holt. I had never heard the name. Gloria traced the credentials and discovered that Holt's medical license had been suspended 2 years earlier for insurance fraud. Vivian had not just planned my death, she was already spending the money. Then Gloria found the final piece. A real estate transaction recorded 3 weeks ago in San Jose, Costa Rica. A 4-bedroom villa, purchased under a holding company registered to a name I did not recognize. But the signatory on the closing documents was Vivian Cross. She had also contacted an attorney specializing in international asset transfers and extradition treaties. Gloria looked up from her screen. The blue light made her face appear carved from stone. They are not just killing you, Franklin, she said quietly. They are already packing. I stood up from the chair. My knees felt stiff and my chest ached. But the pain was different now. It was not the confused, helpless pain of a man being slowly erased. It was the sharp, focused pain of a man who could finally see the entire blueprint of his own destruction laid out in front of him. Every beam, every joint, every deliberate flaw designed to bring the structure down at exactly the right moment. I stepped onto Broughton Street. The Savannah air was warm and heavy, with the scent of magnolia blossoms and river mud. The city stretched around me in its usual beauty, the church steeples and the squares and the old oak trees wearing their curtains of Spanish moss. For 30 years I had loved this city the way a shipbuilder loves the harbor where his vessels are born. Now the skyline looked different. The buildings seemed to lean inward, their rooflines sharp against the sky, like the teeth of a trap waiting to close. "I built this harbor," I said to no one. The words had become a compass heading, a fixed point I could steer toward when everything else was spinning. "And I will not let my son sink it." I stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning and practiced dying. I let my shoulders sag until my spine curved like a mast buckling under too much wind. I slowed my breathing to shallow, irregular gasps. I allowed my jaw to hang slightly open and my eyes to drift out of focus, mimicking the glazed expression of a man whose central nervous system was quietly surrendering. The reflection staring back at me looked convincing, broken, fading, exactly what Bennett expected to see. The best performance of my life would not take place in a boardroom or on a stage. It would happen in my own living room, in front of my own son, while he served me the tea that was designed to stop my heart. I had been taking Dr. Cross's detoxification capsules for 4 days. Each morning I opened the multivitamin bottle, swallowed the bitter, chalky pill hidden inside, and felt the faint burn of the chelating agent moving through my bloodstream, like a slow tide washing poison from a contaminated shore. The fog in my mind had already begun to lift. My hands were steadier. The chest pains came less frequently. But none of these improvements could be visible. Not yet. Not until the trap was set and the jaws were ready to close. I shuffled into the living room of my Savannah townhouse and lowered myself into the wingback chair beside the fireplace with an exaggerated groan. The leather creaked beneath me. I let my arm hang limp over the armrest, fingers dangling toward the floor. The room smelled of old tobacco, polished wood, and the lingering sweetness of the magnolia tree outside the window. I waited. Bennett arrived at 10:15. I heard his car pull into the driveway, the engine cutting off with a confident finality. His footsteps crossed the porch with a jaunty rhythm that used to bring me a simple, fatherly pleasure. Now it sounded like a countdown. He let himself in with the key I had never thought to take back. The front door opened and closed. His footsteps crossed the hardwood floor toward the study, then paused. I heard the quiet clink of porcelain in the kitchen, the soft whistle of the kettle, the particular rustling sound of dried herbs being measured into a strainer. He was preparing the tea, the ritual he had performed every visit for the past 6 months, always with that same expression of dutiful concern. He appeared in the doorway carrying a small wooden tray. 2 cups. A pot of Earl Grey, blended with what he called Vivian's special herbal supplement. The steam rose in thin curls that carried a scent I had once found comforting. Now it smelled like a eulogy being written in advance. "You look tired today, Dad," Bennett said. His voice was smooth and practiced. "Have you been taking your supplements?" I let my head loll slightly to one side. "Everything feels heavy," I whispered. My voice came out thin and papery, like my blood is turning to lead. He offered me a smile that did not reach his eyes and set the tray on the mahogany side table. I watched through half-closed lids as he pushed 1 cup toward me. The cup with the faintly chipped rim. Iris had once told me that Vivian always prepared that specific cup for Franklin. The designated vessel. Bennett turned toward the window. "It is drafty in here," he said, reaching for the heavy iron latch. "You should keep these closed. The cold is not good for your circulation." The moment his back was turned, I moved. My hand shot out with a speed that contradicted every symptom I had performed for the past 10 minutes. I swapped the cups in a single fluid motion, rotating the tray so that the chipped cup now sat in front of his chair and the clean cup sat in front of mine. The switch took less than 2 seconds. My heart hammered against my ribs, but it was adrenaline now, not poison. He turned back. I was already reaching for the clean cup with a trembling hand. The picture of a broken man grateful for his son's attention. "Drink up, Dad," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "It is a special blend Vivian found. Very restorative." I lifted my cup and pretended to sip. The liquid barely touched my lips. Across from me, Bennett raised his own cup and drank deeply. The warm tea disappeared in 3 long swallows. He drank my death without hesitation, without even tasting what was in it, because he had never once imagined that the dying man might still have teeth. We sat together for 20 minutes. He talked about the weather, about a restaurant opening on River Street, about nothing that mattered. I responded in weak monosyllables, playing the part. Then I saw it, a slight hesitation in his hand as he reached for his phone, a faint glaze passing over his eyes like morning fog rolling across the river. He stood to leave and his knee buckled for a fraction of a second, his fingers catching the edge of the side table to steady himself. I watched my son stumble on the same poison he had been feeding me. I expected to feel satisfaction, or vindication, or the sharp pleasure of a trap successfully sprung. I felt none of those things. I felt the vast, empty silence of a man watching the last thread connecting him to his child dissolve in a cup of bitter tea. After his taillights disappeared down the street, I moved to the next phase. I called Gerald Poole, a retired shipping broker who had worked with Mercer Maritime in the early years. Gerald was 63, well-meaning, and constitutionally incapable of keeping a secret for longer than 48 hours. I told him, casually, that I had heard a rumor about a young pregnant woman matching Iris's description working at a diner near the bus station in Jacksonville, Florida. I asked him not to mention it to anyone. I knew he would tell at least 4 people by dinner. The false trail was bait. If Bennett believed Iris was in Jacksonville, he would spend his energy chasing a ghost in the wrong city while I fortified the real walls around her. That evening, alone in the quiet house, I checked the surveillance feed Willis had set up around the Tybee cottage. Iris was asleep. The security lights were steady. No movement beyond the usual raccoons testing the garbage cans. I allowed myself one long breath of relief. Then my phone buzzed. A message from a number I did not recognize. I opened it and read the words twice. It was Ray Dawson, the private investigator I had retained 2 days earlier. His message was brief and precise. Got the pharmacy footage. It is her. Clear as day. But there is something else. She has been meeting someone at the port after midnight. Someone who is not Bennett. I set the phone down on the table. The screen glowed pale blue in the dark room. Vivian Cross was not just Bennett's accomplice. She was running a parallel operation, and whatever she was doing at the port at midnight, my son did not know about it. The dying man's performance was over. The hunter's work was about to begin. The parking structure beneath the Talmadge Memorial Bridge was the kind of place where honest conversations happened precisely because no honest person would choose to meet there. The concrete ceiling hung low and stained with moisture. A single fluorescent tube flickered at the far end, casting a sickly yellow pulse across the damp walls. The air smelled of river water, old exhaust, and the metallic tang of rusting rebar. I parked my car in the shadow of a support column and waited. Ray Dawson arrived 2 minutes later. At 55, Ray had the worn, watchful appearance of a man who had spent 20 years in the Savannah Police Department before retiring to private investigation. He moved quietly for his size, a habit left over from years of approaching doors that might open the wrong way. He did not shake my hand. He simply leaned against the hood of his sedan and held up a tablet, its screen glowing blue in the underground darkness. She thought she was invisible, Ray said. His voice was calm and flat, the tone of a man who had long ago stopped being surprised by what people were capable of. But everybody leaves a footprint somewhere. He tapped the screen. A grainy black and white video began to play. Security camera footage from a pharmacy on the western outskirts of Savannah. The timestamp read 11:47. At night, a woman entered the frame wearing an oversized coat and a dark wig that sat slightly crooked on her head. Sunglasses covered half her face despite the late hour. The disguise was confident but careless, the work of someone who believed no one was watching closely enough to care. I watched her approach the pharmacy counter. sign an electronic purchase pad, and receive a sealed white bag. She paid with a credit card. She smiled politely at the clerk. Then she left, walking with the particular stride I had observed dozens of times across polished floors and expensive carpets. "That is Vivian Cross," I said quietly. "Even with the wig. Look at the way she carries her shoulders." Ray nodded. "The clerk remembers her. Said she identified herself as a laboratory technician purchasing supplies for a clinical study. She bought industrial quantities of digoxin, enough to maintain a slow poisoning regimen for months." He swiped to the next image. A zoomed capture of the electronic signature pad. The name on the purchase was not Vivian Cross. It was Tommy Reeves, one of the two deckhands Bennett had fired from Mercer Maritime 6 months ago for alleged inventory theft. Vivian had used his employee identification number and his name to make the purchase, burying her trail under the identity of a man my son had already destroyed. "The credit card she used traces back to Palmetto Bridge Holdings," Ray continued. "One of the shell companies your accountant flagged. She ran the poison through the same pipeline as the stolen money." I stared at the frozen image of Vivian, smiling at the pharmacy clerk. A woman purchasing the chemicals to kill me with the same casual ease that most people use to pick up a prescription for allergy medicine. Ray swiped again. A new set of files filled the screen. Real estate records from Costa Rica. A 4-bedroom villa in a gated community outside San Jose, purchased 3 weeks ago through a holding company. Airline records showing a one-way ticket from Savannah to San Jose, booked under a name I did not recognize, but cross-referenced by Ray to a fraudulent passport application filed by Vivian 2 months earlier. Then the last piece. Surveillance photographs taken at the Savannah port between midnight and 2 in the morning on 3 separate occasions. In each image, Vivian stood on the commercial dock, speaking with a bearded man in a captain's jacket. Ray had identified him as a freelance charter captain who operated a 40-foot sailing vessel out of Hilton Head. "She is not just planning to fly," Ray said. "She has a backup escape route by sea. If the airports get flagged, she sails south through the Intercoastal Waterway and connects with a cargo route to the Caribbean. From there, it is a short hop to Costa Rica." He paused. "They are not waiting for you to die, Franklin. They are already preparing to leave. And based on the timeline, I would say they plan to be gone within 30 days. 30 days. The same window Dr. Cross had given me before the digoxin finished its work on my heart. The synchronization was precise. Vivian had calculated the exact date of my death and built her escape around it like a ship's course plotted to arrive at port on schedule. I thanked Ray and drove across the marshland toward Tybee Island. The highway stretched flat and empty under a sky thick with stars. The salt air grew stronger through the cracked window, carrying the smell of cord grass and tidal mud. But Tybee was no longer safe. Bennett knew about the property. His threat at the penthouse had made that clear. I needed to move Iris tonight. I reached the cottage and found her awake, sitting in the kitchen with her hands wrapped around a glass of water. The fear that had clouded her face the night I found her had softened slightly, replaced by something more fragile. Hope, maybe, or the memory of what hope used to feel like. "We need to move," I told her gently. "Tonight, I have somewhere safer." She did not ask questions. She simply stood, collected the small bag of belongings she had accumulated during her days in hiding, and followed me to the car. The trust in that gesture, the silent willingness to place her life and her child's life in my hands without hesitation, settled over me like a weight I swore I would never drop. I drove her to Wilmington Island. The house sat at the end of a crushed oyster shell road, surrounded by live oaks and the thick, sweet scent of magnolia trees. It was the house where Catherine and I had raised Bennett. The house where my wife had planted the garden that still bloomed every spring without anyone tending it. I had not entered it since her funeral. I unlocked the front door and guided Iris inside. She moved slowly through the hallway, one hand on the wall for balance, the other resting on her belly. When she reached the second bedroom, she stopped in the doorway. I had hired a crew to prepare the room 3 days earlier, working in secret through Willis. A crib stood against the far wall. A rocking chair sat beside the window. The walls had been painted a soft, pale blue that caught the moonlight coming through the curtains. The room smelled of fresh paint and lavender. Iris pressed her fingers against the wooden railing of the crib. Her shoulders began to shake. Tears ran down her face in silence. "It smells like magnolia flowers," she whispered. "It smells like your wife, Franklin." I stood in the doorway and said nothing. This had been Bennett's nursery once. The same room where I had rocked my son to sleep 34 years ago, singing the same lullaby my father Aframlian had sung to me on the deck of the Magnolia. The boy who slept in that crib had grown into the man who was trying to kill me. And now his child would sleep in the same room, under the protection of the grandfather he had tried to bury. I stepped onto the porch. The night was quiet. The river moved somewhere beyond the trees, invisible but constant. For the first time in days, the tightness in my chest had nothing to do with digoxin. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I opened the message. "I know she is not in Jacksonville anymore, Dad. And I know about the baby." Tick-tock. I looked at the screen. Then I looked at the nursery window, where the pale blue light glowed softly behind the curtain. The clock was running, but so was I. For 3 days, the house on Wilmington Island felt like a ceasefire. The live oaks surrounding the property filtered the sunlight into soft green patterns on the wooden floors, and the constant murmur of the river beyond the tree line created a rhythm that almost resembled peace. Almost, because peace required the absence of threat, and the threat had not disappeared. It had simply paused to reload. Iris grew stronger. Dr. Haskell visited each morning, arriving through the back gate with her medical bag and the quiet efficiency of a woman accustomed to keeping secrets. The intravenous fluids and nutritional supplements were working. Color returned to Iris's cheeks. Her movements became less careful, less pained. She began eating full meals for the first time in months, sitting at the kitchen table where Catherine's handwritten recipe cards still hung on a corkboard above the stove. I took my detoxification capsule every morning with orange juice, hiding the bitter taste behind the pulp. Each day the fog in my mind thinned a little more. My hands steadied. The chest pains retreated from a constant grinding pressure to an occasional dull ache that came and went like a tide pulling back from shore. I was healing, but I performed the opposite. Whenever I spoke on the phone with anyone connected to the company, I made my voice thinner, weaker, more confused. The dying man's performance continued, even as the dying man was quietly coming back to life. On the third evening, I sat beside Iris in the living room, reading aloud from a collection of short stories I had found on Catherine's bookshelf. The book smelled of old paper and the faint trace of my wife's perfume, a ghost scent that had somehow survived the years. Iris lay on the sofa with a wool blanket pulled to her shoulders, her eyes half closed, listening to my voice the way a sailor listens to a lighthouse horn through fog. I paused between chapters and rested my hand gently against her stomach through the soft cotton of her shirt. I had done this once before, years ago, when Catherine was pregnant with Bennett. I remembered the feeling of waiting for a sign of life beneath my palm, the strange patience of holding still and trusting that something extraordinary was about to happen. Then it came. A sudden sharp movement struck the center of my hand. Not a flutter, not a ripple. A kick, firm, deliberate, and startlingly strong, as though the child inside had wound up and punched the wall of his world with everything he had. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "Did you feel that?" Iris whispered. A tired but genuine smile touched her lips for the first time since I had found her on the floor of the River Street Inn. "He is awake." I pressed my hand a little firmer. The kick came again, harder this time, pushing against my palm with a force that seemed impossible for something so small. "Hello there, Elijah," I murmured. The name felt like a promise being made in a language older than words. "Your grandpa is not going anywhere. I swear that on every ship I have ever built." He kicked harder when I spoke, as though he recognized my voice through the wall of muscle and fluid separating us. A 7-month-old fist, insisting on being acknowledged. I realized then that my fight had changed. It was no longer about the company or the money or even the poison in my blood. It was about this kick, this small, furious announcement of existence from a child who did not yet know how dangerous the world outside was waiting to be. The following morning I made a phone call I had been preparing for days. Judge Eleanor Whitfield answered on the second ring. At 72, Eleanor carried the quiet authority of a woman who had spent 40 years interpreting the law and had developed very little patience for those who broke it. She had been a close friend of Catherine's. They had served together on the board of the Savannah Historical Foundation, and Eleanor had delivered the eulogy at my wife's funeral with a composure that made the rest of us feel ashamed of our tears. "Eleanor," I said, "I need an emergency protection order for my daughter-in-law and her unborn child, and I need it before this situation reaches a courtroom where Bennett's lawyers can delay it into irrelevance." The line was quiet for a moment. When Eleanor spoke, her voice carried a weight that told me she had been waiting for exactly this conversation. "I have been expecting this call for 7 months, Franklin," she said. "Your wife spoke to me about Bennett before she passed. She was worried. She saw something in him that you were not ready to see. I told her I would watch. And I have been watching." The words hit me like a wave breaking over the bow of a ship I thought was anchored in safe water. Catherine had known. She had seen the cracks in Bennett's foundation before anyone else, and she had quietly placed a sentinel at the gate. Even from beyond the grave, my wife was still protecting this family. Eleanor agreed to prepare the emergency protection order and have it ready for filing within 48 hours. She also connected me with a contact at the regional FBI field office who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse. The federal angle was critical. Bennett's embezzlement crossed state lines through the Delaware shell companies, which gave federal prosecutors jurisdiction and removed the case from the local courts where Bennett might have allies. That afternoon, I met with Ray Dawson and Captain Willis at the Wilmington House to finalize the plan for the Bohemian Hotel. The trap needed to be precise. Camera placement, audio recording, FBI positioning in the adjacent suite. The invitation to Bennett had to be worded carefully enough to appeal to his greed without triggering his suspicion. We spent 4 hours working through every detail, every contingency, every possible way the operation could fail. By nightfall, the plan was set. I sat on the porch of the Wilmington house watching the sky darken over the river. The air had changed during the afternoon. The barometric pressure had dropped steadily, and the weather service was tracking a tropical storm moving up the coast from Florida. The live oaks swayed in a wind that carried the sharp, metallic smell of approaching rain. I went inside and found Iris reading in the living room. I sat beside her and opened the book again, picking up where I had left off the night before. The house was warm. The lamps cast amber light across the walls. Elijah kicked twice against my hand when I rested it on Iris's belly, strong and impatient, as though he could sense the storm approaching and wanted to remind me he was ready. Then I saw it. Through the nursery window at the end of the hallway, a thin beam of light swept across the glass. It moved slowly, deliberately, from left to right, like the beam of a searchlight scanning the surface of dark water. A flashlight. Outside the nursery window, someone was standing in the yard. I placed my hand on Iris's shoulder. She looked up and saw my face. The color drained from her cheeks in an instant. She did not need me to explain. 7 months of survival had taught her to read danger the way animals read the scent of a predator on the wind. I reached for my phone. Willis answered before the second ring. "They found us," I said quietly. "Get the car. Back gate. Lights off." Willis killed the headlights before the truck cleared the back gate. The engine rumbled low through the darkness as we rolled down the oyster shell road with nothing but moonlight and instinct to guide us. In the back seat, Iris pressed herself flat against the leather, both hands wrapped around her belly, her breathing fast and shallow. The flashlight beam had disappeared from the nursery window by the time we reached the gate, but its ghost lingered in my mind, like the afterimage of a flare seen at sea. The tropical storm hit Savannah 30 minutes later. The sky opened without warning, as though someone had cut a hole in the bottom of the ocean and let it pour through. Rain hammered the roof of the truck with a violence that drowned out the engine. The windshield became a wall of water that Willis navigated by memory, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on a road he could no longer see. The marshland highway between Wilmington Island and the mainland flooded within minutes. Water rose over the tires, turning the asphalt into a shallow river that reflected the occasional flash of lightning in long silver streaks. Willis did not slow down. He drove the way he captained a ship in rough seas, with a calm ferocity that treated the storm as an inconvenience rather than a threat. Then Iris screamed. The sound cut through the roar of the rain like a blade through canvas. I turned in my seat and saw her face contorted in pain, her fingers clawing at the door handle, her body curling inward around the contraction that had seized her without mercy. "Franklin," she gasped. Her eyes were wide and wild. "Something is wrong. It is too early. He is coming." I reached back and grabbed her hand. Her grip crushed my fingers with a strength that seemed impossible for a woman who had weighed almost nothing when I carried her out of a hotel kitchen 10 days ago. "Willis," I said. My voice came out steady, despite the chaos hammering against every surface of the vehicle. "Memorial Health. The secondary ambulance bay. Drive like the river is chasing us." Willis pressed the accelerator. The truck surged forward through the flooded road, throwing sheets of black water against the windows. The engine roared. The wipers beat a frantic rhythm that could not keep pace with the rain. Somewhere behind us, a tree branch cracked and fell across the road we had just passed. The storm was closing doors behind us one by one. Iris's contractions came fast and brutal. Each one lasted longer than the one before, and the gaps between them shrank with a speed that made my heart pound harder than any digoxin episode ever had. She gripped the headrest of my seat with one hand and my wrist with the other, her nails digging into my skin hard enough to draw blood. I did not pull away. The pain in my wrist was the most honest connection I had felt in months. "Breathe, Iris," I said. "Just breathe. I have sailed through hurricanes. We can handle a baby in the rain." She laughed through her tears. A broken, beautiful sound that lasted half a second before the next contraction stole it away. We reached Memorial Health in 22 minutes. Willis swung the truck into the secondary ambulance bay, a restricted zone I had secured weeks earlier through a substantial equipment donation that gave me private access privileges. The bay doors opened under a specific security badge Willis carried. The fluorescent lights of the emergency department exploded through the windshield like a sunrise made of electricity. Dr. Haskell was waiting. I had called ahead from the car, shouting over the storm and the contractions and the sound of my own heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. She stood inside the bay doors with 2 nurses and a gurney, her scrubs already spotted with rain that had blown in through the opening. "She is fully dilated," I shouted as Willis and I helped Iris out of the truck. The wind tore at my coat and drove rain sideways into my face. Iris could barely stand. Her legs buckled twice before the nurses caught her and guided her onto the gurney. The wheels made a sharp, rhythmic thud against the concrete floor as they rushed her inside. The delivery room was a blur of light, sound, and controlled urgency. Monitors beeped in patterns I could not decode. Nurses moved with a precision that looked choreographed. Iris lay on the table, pale and drenched in sweat, every muscle in her body engaged in the most fundamental act of construction a human being can perform. Dr. Haskell positioned herself and spoke to Iris with the steady, encouraging voice of a woman who had guided hundreds of lives into the world. "One more, Iris. Just one more for your son." "I cannot," Iris whispered. Her voice was a ragged thread about to snap. "Franklin, I cannot." I stood beside her and took her hand. "You can," I said. "And you will. Because he needs you. And I need you both." She looked at me. Something shifted in her eyes. The exhaustion remained, but beneath it, a flame reignited, small and fierce, the last coal in a fire that refuses to die. She pushed. At exactly 2:47 in the morning, while the tropical storm battered the windows of Memorial Health and the lights of Savannah flickered beneath the weight of the wind, Elijah Mercer entered the world. He announced his arrival with a cry so sharp and indignant that it cut through the sound of the storm itself. The nurses cleaned him quickly and wrapped him in a soft blue blanket. 7 pounds. 1 ounce. A head of dark hair matted against his scalp. Fists clenched tight, already fighting. Dr. Haskell lifted him and placed him in my arms. I had held ship's wheels in hurricanes. I had gripped steel cables under tension that could have cut me in half. I had shaken hands with governors and senators and men who controlled the flow of money across entire continents. None of it prepared me for the weight of this child. He weighed 7 pounds and 1 ounce. But in my arms, he felt heavier than every ship I had ever launched. I looked down at his face. His eyes were dark and serious, ancient somehow, as though he had arrived in this world already knowing something important that the rest of us had spent our lives trying to learn. Then I saw it. On his left shoulder, partially hidden beneath the edge of the blanket, a small birthmark in the unmistakable shape of an anchor. The same mark my father had carried. The same mark my grandfather had carried before him. 3 generations of Mercer men, connected by a symbol that my son had tried to erase and my grandson had brought back from the dead. "Welcome to the harbor, Elijah," I whispered. "Your grandpa is not going anywhere." He opened his mouth and yawned. Then his tiny fist uncurled and wrapped around my index finger with a grip that would not let go. Behind me, through the window of the recovery room, I noticed a woman in nurse's scrubs approaching the front desk. She was asking questions, pointing toward the maternity wing. I did not recognize her face, and when the duty nurse checked the shift roster, her name was not on it. Captain Willis intercepted the woman before she reached the maternity wing corridor. He stepped into her path, with the unhurried authority of a man who had spent decades blocking waves with the hull of his body. One hand rose, palm open, steady as a dock, piling in a current. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I need to see your identification badge." She hesitated. Her eyes moved past Willis, toward the hallway behind him, calculating the distance to the room where Iris and Elijah lay sleeping. She wore standard hospital scrubs and a lanyard with a badge that looked convincing from a distance. But Willis was not looking from a distance. He was standing close enough to read the name printed on the laminate. The duty nurse at the front desk confirmed what Willis already suspected. The name on the badge did not appear on the shift roster. There was no record of this woman being assigned to the maternity wing. There was no record of her being employed by Memorial Health at all. The woman turned and walked quickly toward the stairwell exit. She did not run. Running would have attracted attention from the security cameras mounted at every corridor junction. She simply moved with the purposeful speed of someone who had been trained to enter and leave buildings without creating a memory. The stairwell door closed behind her with a soft metallic click, and she was gone. Willis returned to me in the recovery room. His face carried the controlled tension of a man who understood exactly what had just happened and exactly what it meant. "She was not hospital staff," he said quietly. "Someone sent her to confirm the room number." I stood beside Elijah's bassinet, my hand resting on the clear plastic rim. Through the transparent wall, I could see his face, peaceful and oblivious. His tiny chest rising and falling, with the slow rhythm of a life that had existed for less than 4 hours. He did not know that a stranger had just walked through these corridors looking for him. He did not know that his own father considered him a bargaining chip rather than a child. Bennett had found the hospital. The ceasefire was over. My phone rang 20 minutes later. I stepped into the hallway to answer it, positioning myself where I could still see the bassinet through the window. Bennett's voice came through the receiver, stripped of every pretense he had ever worn. No concerned son, no dutiful heir. Just the raw, entitled fury of a man who believed the world existed to serve his appetites. "I know where you are," he said. "I know about the baby, and I have already filed for emergency custody." Given Iris's documented history of instability and substance abuse, No judge in Chatham County will hesitate to hand that child to his biological father. Documented history. He was referring to the fabricated medical records he had paid a corrupt physician to create. The same lies he had used to drive Iris from her own home. He was planning to weaponize his own forgeries in family court, betting that a local judge would accept the paperwork at face value before anyone could challenge it. "You will need to step over my body and a federal judge to touch that bassinet, Bennett," I replied. My voice was low and even. I had no interest in matching his volume. Volume was the tool of a man who had already lost control. He laughed. The sound was sharp and brittle, like glass cracking under pressure. "You think a federal judge cares about a senile old man with a bad heart? I will have Iris committed to a psychiatric facility by Friday, and once she is locked up, that baby comes home with me. Try to stop me, and I will have your medical records subpoenaed. Every dizzy spell, every blackout, every episode that proves you are mentally unfit to make decisions for anyone, including yourself." The line went dead. I stood in the fluorescent corridor, the distant beep of heart monitors filling the silence he left behind. His threat was not empty. In a local court, with a compliant judge and forged documents, Bennett could delay and manipulate the process long enough to cause real damage. That was precisely why I had prepared the federal route through Judge Whitfield. I returned to the recovery room and checked the burner phone Willis had confiscated from the scout at the Wilmington gate the night before. Ray Dawson had extracted the call logs and forwarded them to my encrypted tablet. I scrolled through the records, looking for Bennett's number. It was not there. The last outgoing call from the scout's phone had been placed to Vivian Cross, not to Bennett. The scout, who had been watching the nursery window, was not reporting to my son. He was reporting to my son's mistress. I sat down slowly in the vinyl chair beside the bassinet. The realization settled over me, like cold water filling the lower compartments of a ship that has struck something beneath the surface. Bennett was dangerous. But Bennett was also predictable. His moves were driven by greed and entitlement, emotions that made him loud and sloppy and easy to anticipate. Vivian was something else entirely. She was quiet. She was patient. She operated on a separate frequency that my son could not even detect. Bennett thought he was running the operation. Vivian was letting him believe that while she built her own exit strategy behind his back, my son was a fool playing chess, I murmured, looking down at Elijah's sleeping face. But his mistress is playing a different game entirely, and she is already 3 moves ahead of him. I checked the time. 4:17 in the morning. The storm outside had begun to weaken, the rain thinning from a wall of water into a steady gray curtain. I dialed Judge Whitfield. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was alert and precise, the voice of a woman who had not gone to sleep because she knew this call was coming. "Eleanor," I said, "I need the emergency protection order filed before sunrise, and I need the FBI contact activated. We cannot wait any longer." "I have already drafted the paperwork," she replied. "Your wife asked me to protect this family, Franklin. I do not intend to fail her now." I ended the call and stood at the window. The city of Savannah stretched out below the hospital in the pre-dawn darkness, its streetlights blurred by the fading rain into soft halos of amber and white. Somewhere in that city, Bennett was planning his next move. Somewhere else, Vivian was planning hers. And somewhere in this room, a 7-pound child slept without knowing that the 2 people who should have loved him most were the 2 greatest threats to his existence. I picked up my phone one final time and composed a text message to Bennett. The words were simple. The trap behind them was not. Bohemian Hotel, Suite 601, tomorrow at noon. Come alone. We will discuss a transfer of operational authority. This ends tomorrow. I pressed send. The message disappeared into the digital current. I looked back at Elijah. His tiny hand had escaped the blanket and was resting on the mattress. Fingers slightly curled, as though reaching for something he could not yet name. "I will be that something," I whispered. I promise you that. The Bohemian Hotel sat on the riverfront like a monument to elegance that had learned how to keep secrets. Suite 601 occupied the top floor, its tall windows overlooking the slow brown current of the Savannah River. I arrived 3 hours early. The room smelled of fresh lilies and polished mahogany. I had chosen the lilies deliberately. Vivian Cross had a mild allergy to them. If she accompanied Bennett, the flowers would keep her distracted, irritated, and off balance. Every detail in this room served a purpose. Ray Dawson had installed the surveillance equipment the previous night. Pinhole cameras were embedded in the crown molding above the desk and inside the frame of a landscape painting on the opposite wall. Directional microphones lined the baseboards behind the furniture, positioned to capture conversation from every angle. In the adjoining suite, separated by a single locked door, 2 FBI agents from the Savannah field office waited in silence, alongside Detective Ramirez, a 40-year-old veteran whose face looked carved from the same gray stone as the old Savannah courthouse. I tested the audio feed one final time. "Is it live, Ray?" I murmured into the transmitter concealed beneath my collar. The reply crackled softly through my earpiece. "Loud and clear, Franklin. The moment they walk in, everything is recorded." I positioned myself behind the mahogany desk at the center of the suite. The surface felt cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. I placed a single document in the center of the desk, a medical power of attorney form. The document authorized the designated signatory to make all healthcare decisions on my behalf, including the authority to discontinue life-sustaining treatment. It was bait, a piece of paper that represented everything Bennett wanted, the legal right to pull the plug on his own father. I practiced the tremor in my hand one final time, allowing my fingers to shake visibly under the light of the desk lamp. Then, I waited. At precisely noon, the double doors opened. Bennett entered first. He was alone. No Vivian. The absence registered immediately. She had not come. Whether Bennett had told her to stay away or whether she had chosen to remain at a distance, the result was the same. Vivian Cross was not where I expected her to be, and that meant she was somewhere else, doing something I had not anticipated. Bennett looked healthier than the last time I had seen him. His arrogance had refueled during the days since our confrontation at the penthouse. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed the final negotiation was about to go his way. "You look worse every time I see you, Dad," he said, settling into the velvet chair across the desk. His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on the lilies before returning to my face. "Let us make this quick. I want operational authority restored, full access to accounts, my trust reinstated, and I want the boy's birth certificate amended to reflect my legal paternity." I let him talk. I let him lay out every demand, every condition, every term of surrender he expected me to accept. Each sentence was another brick in the wall he was building around his own confession. The cameras recorded everything. The microphones captured every word. When he finished, I slid the medical power of attorney across the desk toward him. His eyes lit up. He reached for it immediately, his fingers already anticipating the weight of the pen. "Before you sign," I said quietly, "I want to show you something." I opened the desk drawer and removed a thin medical file, the toxicology report from Dr. Cross. I placed it on the desk between us. The dry sound of paper against polished wood echoed in the silent room. Bennett's hand froze above the power of attorney. His eyes dropped to the file. The bold header read, "Toxicological Analysis Franklin J. Mercer." Beneath it, highlighted in clinical red, "Digoxin concentration lethal chronic dosage confirmed. Systematic administration indicated." The color left his face in stages. First the cheeks, then the lips, then the skin around his eyes, as though the blood itself was retreating from the truth. I did not stop there. I opened a second file. Gloria Vance's forensic audit. $890,000 traced through 3 shell companies to a Cayman Islands account under Vivian's maiden name. Wire transfers authorized with my biometric signature during digoxin-induced blackouts. The life insurance amendment to $12 million with the accidental cardiac event rider. The forged medical certificate from the disgraced Dr. Holt. The Costa Rica villa. I laid each document on the desk like cards in a hand that could not lose. Bennett's composure disintegrated with each page. The confident negotiator who had walked through the door 12 minutes ago was gone. In his place sat a man watching the walls of his own fortress collapse inward. "It was all Vivian," he stammered. His voice cracked at the edges. "She brought the drugs. She set up the accounts. I was just trying to protect the company." I stared at him. The boy I had raised was offering me the oldest defense in the history of cowardice. Someone else made me do it. I built ships for a living. I knew exactly how much pressure a structure could absorb before it broke, and my son had just exceeded his limit. Then his desperation shifted to threat. His eyes hardened. His jaw set. "Give me the boy and the company," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Or I will make sure Iris is in a psychiatric ward by tonight. I will have her declared unfit. I will take that child and I will raise him to know that his grandfather was a senile old man who died alone in a hotel room." I did not blink. Bennett lunged for the power of attorney. His hand closed around the pen. The moment his fingers touched the signature line, the adjoining door opened. Detective Ramirez stepped through first. His badge caught the light from the window. Behind him, 2 FBI agents moved into the room with the practiced efficiency of men who had rehearsed this moment dozens of times. Their weapons remained holstered. They did not need them. The evidence was already louder than any gun. Bennett's hand froze on the pen. His head turned slowly toward the badge. The sound that came from his throat was not a word. It was the hollow, airless gasp of a man who had just realized that the floor beneath him had been removed. The handcuffs made a sharp metallic sound as they closed around his wrists. The ratchet clicked twice. A small, precise sound that carried the weight of 34 years. 34 years of fatherhood ended with the sound of a ratchet closing around my son's wrists. It should have felt like victory. It felt like an amputation. Bennett began to babble as they led him toward the door. It was her idea. Vivian brought the powders. I was protecting the company. "Dad, please. You have to believe me." "Quiet, Bennett," I said. My voice was a dispassionate rasp. "Every word you speak only adds another year to your sentence." I watched them take him through the double doors. His designer shoes scuffed against the carpet as he stumbled between the agents. He did not look back. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Captain Willis. 5 words that turned my relief into ice. The Magnolia just left the dock without authorization. Someone is running. Vivian had not come to the hotel because she never intended to. The arrest was not a surprise to her. It was her diversion. The marble floors of the Bohemian Hotel lobby blurred beneath my shoes as I sprinted toward the service exit. Willis's text burned in my mind like a flare over dark water. The Magnolia just left the dock without authorization. Someone is running. I knew who. Vivian Cross had watched Bennett's arrest from somewhere close, maybe a car across the street, maybe a window in the building next door, and the moment those handcuffs clicked shut, she understood the entire architecture of their scheme was collapsing. She ran to the only escape route she had prepared months ago. My flagship. My father's ship. The vessel that carried 3 generations of Mercer cargo across the Atlantic and back. Willis was waiting at Dock 7 with the engine of his tugboat already growling. The old captain stood at the wheel with both hands locked, his jaw set like a man who had been waiting for this moment longer than he would ever admit. I climbed aboard, and he throttled forward before my second foot left the pier. The river opened ahead of us, wide and dark and restless under the remnants of the tropical storm. Rain had stopped 2 hours ago. But the current was still angry, pushing brown water against the concrete seawalls with a low, rhythmic violence that rattled the hull beneath my feet. I could see her. Half a mile ahead, the Magnolia cut through the channel with her running lights off, a shadow moving against the distant glow of Hutchinson Island. She was heading east toward the open Atlantic, toward a charter route that would carry her south along the coast and eventually to a private dock in the Florida Keys where, according to Ray Dawson's intelligence, a second boat waited to take her across the Gulf to Costa Rica. A country with no extradition treaty for financial crimes. A country where a woman named Elena Vargas had already purchased a villa with ocean views using money stolen from a dying man's company. Willis radioed the Coast Guard. Within 9 minutes, a cutter appeared from the Elba Island station, its searchlight slicing through the darkness like a blade. 3 vessels now moved in formation down the Savannah River. The tugboat, the cutter, and ahead of us, the Magnolia, accelerating toward the river's mouth where the channel widened into the Atlantic shipping lanes. Vivian's voice crackled over the marine radio. Channel 16. Open frequency. She spoke calmly, almost pleasantly, as if she were ordering room service at one of the hotels she had grown accustomed to living in on my money. Franklin, I know you are listening. I have documents that will destroy Mercer Maritime publicly. Every board member, every offshore account, every deal your precious Captain Willis helped facilitate before the auditors cleaned house. You let me pass, and these files stay sealed. You chase me, and I send everything to the Savannah Morning News before sunrise. I picked up the handset. My fingers were steady. My voice was not. Vivian, I said, you are on a stolen vessel, carrying evidence obtained through fraud, forgery, and attempted murder. The Coast Guard is 200 yards behind you. There is no version of this story where you reach open water. Silence. Then static. Then nothing. Willis brought the tugboat alongside the Magnolia near the Cockspur Island lighthouse. The water was rough, the gap between the 2 hulls opening and closing like a jaw. A Coast Guard officer threw a boarding line. I grabbed it. Willis shouted something I could not hear over the wind, but his face said everything. Be careful. Come back. I stepped across the gap onto the deck of my own ship and felt the familiar teak planking beneath my shoes, the same wood my father had installed 40 years ago. The wheelhouse door was open. Vivian stood behind the helm, one hand on the throttle, the other clutching a black waterproof bag pressed against her chest like a shield. Her hair was wet. Her eyes were wide but controlled. She was not panicking. She was calculating. I have $200,000 in this bag, she said. Cash, a passport, and a USB drive containing every transaction, every forged signature, every communication between me and Bennett for the past 14 months. You want this drive, Franklin. You need it for your case. Let me take the dinghy. 30 minutes. Head start. That is all I am asking. I looked at the bag. I looked at her. I thought about the woman who had worn my dead wife's anniversary necklace, who had slept in my house, eaten at my table, and mixed poison into my tea every night with the patience of someone watering a garden. I thought about Iris scrubbing tiles on her hands and knees, with my grandchild pressing against her spine. I thought about Catherine, who would have seen through this woman in the first 5 minutes. No, I said. The Coast Guard officers came through the aft door. 2 men in tactical vests. They ordered Vivian to step away from the helm and place the bag on the deck. She did not resist. She set the bag down slowly, raised her hands, and looked at me with an expression I will carry for the rest of my life. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was disappointment. As if I had failed some test she had designed specifically for me. They cuffed her and walked her across the gangway to the cutter. I opened the waterproof bag. Inside, wrapped in plastic, I found exactly what she had promised. $200,000 in banded 50s. A counterfeit Costa Rica passport bearing the name Elena Vargas with Vivian's photograph. A USB drive. And something she had not mentioned. A handwritten document in my wife Catherine's careful script, folded into quarters and sealed with tape. It was a will addendum, dated 3 months before Catherine's death, naming Iris Bellamy Mercer as a direct beneficiary of the family estate and requesting that she be treated as a daughter in all legal and personal matters. My hands trembled. Catherine had known. She had seen in Iris what I had been too blind and too stubborn and too proud to recognize. She had written it down and hidden it, and Vivian had stolen it from our family safe, planning to destroy it or use it as leverage from a country where I could never reach her. I stood alone on the deck of the Magnolia as the Coast Guard cutter pulled away with Vivian secured below deck. The Cockspur lighthouse swept its beam across the water. I folded Catherine's letter and pressed it against my chest, and I whispered her name into the salt wind. Catherine. I found her. I found our girl. The Chatham County Courthouse smelled like old wood and lemon polish, and something deeper, something institutional, that clung to the walls the way history clings to buildings that have witnessed too many confessions. I arrived at 8:15 in the morning wearing my Navy suit, the one Catherine had picked out for me 11 years ago, at a tailor on Broughton Street. She had run her fingers along the lapel and said, "This is the suit you wear when you need people to remember who you are." I had not worn it since her funeral. It still fit. The shoulders were a little loose now, hollowed out by months of poison and grief, but it still fit. Gloria Vance met me on the courthouse steps. She carried 2 leather briefcases, each one heavy enough to anchor a small boat. Inside those cases were 14 months of evidence. Bank statements from Coastal Heritage Consulting, Palmetto Bridge Holdings, and Low Country Asset Management, the 3 shell companies Bennett and Vivian had used to funnel $890,000 out of Mercer Maritime and into a Cayman Islands account registered under Vivian's maiden name. Transfer receipts showing the $12 million life insurance amendment with the accidental cardiac event rider. Pharmacy surveillance footage of Vivian purchasing industrial quantities of digoxin using Tommy Reeves's stolen identification. Dr. Nathan Cross's toxicology report confirming chronic lethal dosage in my bloodstream. The forged medical certificate from the suspended Dr. Raymond Holt. The counterfeit Costa Rica passport. The $200,000 in banded 50s recovered from the Magnolia. And Catherine's handwritten will addendum, authenticated by a forensic document examiner 3 days after I found it in Vivian's waterproof bag. Detective Ramirez walked beside me through the metal detectors. He had been coordinating with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit since Judge Whitfield issued the emergency protection order, and his case file had grown into something massive, a web of fraud and forgery, and attempted murder that stretched from Savannah to the Cayman Islands to a hilltop villa outside San Jose. He nodded at me once as we entered the courtroom. No words. Just a nod that said, "We built this together and now we finish it." Bennett sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. His wrists were cuffed to a chain around his waist. His court-appointed attorney, a thin man with rimless glasses, shuffled papers without conviction. Bennett looked at me as I sat down in the first row behind the prosecution. His eyes were flat. No anger. No remorse. No recognition of the father who had taught him to tie a bowling knot on the deck of the Magnolia when he was 7 years old. He looked at me the way a stranger looks at a clock on the wall. Measuring time. Calculating distance. Nothing more. The judge, Honorable Patricia Calloway, read the charges. 12 counts. Attempted murder by poisoning. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Embezzlement. Forgery of legal documents. Identity theft. Wire fraud. Money laundering. Falsification of medical records. Unlawful modification of a life insurance policy. Theft of corporate assets. Conspiracy to kidnap a minor. Witness. Intimidation. Each count landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water, and each ripple reached me, where I sat, with my hands folded in my lap, and my heart beating steady for the first time in months, because the digoxin was finally leaving my blood, and my body was remembering what it felt like to be alive, without poison. The prosecution presented their case in 4 hours. Gloria Vance testified for 90 minutes, walking the jury through every transaction, every shell company, every forged signature. Dr. Nathan Cross explained the digoxin poisoning in language so plain and devastating that two jurors visibly recoiled. Ray Dawson's surveillance footage played on a screen mounted above the jury box, showing Vivian at the pharmacy counter, Vivian at the port meeting her charter contact, Vivian boarding the Magnolia with the waterproof bag. Detective Ramirez connected every thread, every timeline, every communication intercepted from Bennett's burner phones. Bennett's attorney offered no defense witnesses. He requested leniency based on Bennett's lack of prior criminal record and his status as a first-time offender. Judge Calloway listened without expression. Then she turned to Bennett and asked if he had anything to say before sentencing. Bennett stood. The chains rattled. He looked at me for the second time that morning, and for one moment, just one, I saw something behind those flat eyes. It was not remorse. It was not love. It was recognition. He recognized that I had beaten him, that the man he had tried to kill quietly in his sleep had outmaneuvered him at every turn, had played dead while gathering evidence, had swapped his tea while smiling across the breakfast table, had protected the woman and child he had tried to erase from the family. "I have nothing to say," Bennett told the judge. Judge Calloway sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for the first 8. Restitution of all stolen funds. Permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with Franklin Mercer, Iris Mercer, and Elijah Mercer. Forfeiture of all claims to Mercer Maritime assets, properties, and intellectual property. The gavel fell. Bennett was escorted through a side door. He did not look back. Vivian Cross was sentenced separately that afternoon. 15 years. Her nursing license revocation was entered into permanent federal record. The Costa Rica villa was seized. The Cayman accounts were frozen and recovery proceedings initiated. She cried during her sentencing, but I had seen her cry before. In my kitchen, at my dining table, when she told me how much she admired Catherine and how she wished she had known her longer. Tears from Vivian Cross meant nothing. They were tools, like the digoxin, like the forged signatures, like the stolen passport. Instruments of manipulation designed to extract sympathy from people who still believed that crying meant suffering. I walked out of the courthouse at 4:37 in the afternoon. The Savannah sun was low and golden, painting the oak trees along Bull Street in amber light. Gloria Vance shook my hand. Ramirez clapped my shoulder. Willis was waiting by the truck, leaning against the hood with his arms crossed, his white captain's hat tilted back. "It is done," I told him. Willis shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "It is not done. You still have a grandson who needs a name on a birth certificate, a daughter-in-law who needs a home, and a company that needs rebuilding from the keel up." He opened the truck door. "So get in, Franklin. We have work to do." He was right. The trial was the end of one story. But standing on those courthouse steps with the Spanish moss swaying overhead and the sound of church bells drifting from the cathedral 2 blocks away, I understood that endings and beginnings share the same heartbeat. Justice had been delivered. Now it was time to build something worthy of the people I had almost lost. The first thing I did after the trial was drive to Wilmington Island and sit in the rocking chair on the front porch and hold my grandson. Elijah was 9 days old. He weighed 7 pounds and 5 ounces now, up from his birth weight. And Dr. Haskell said his vitals were perfect. Strong lungs, strong heart. A boy built for the water, she had said with a smile that told me she understood what that meant to a Mercer. I held him against my chest and felt his breathing, that tiny rhythm like a small engine turning over. Steady and warm and impossible to describe to anyone who has not held a child they almost lost before he was born. Iris sat beside me on the porch swing. She looked different now. The hollows beneath her eyes had softened. Her skin had color again. A warm bronze that reminded me of her wedding day 3 years ago when she had stood in our garden in a white dress and laughed at something Bennett whispered in her ear. I had liked her from that first afternoon. Catherine had loved her instantly. The way Catherine loved anyone who carried kindness without advertising it. And now, with Catherine's will addendum authenticated and entered into the court record, Iris was legally recognized as a direct beneficiary of the Mercer estate. My wife had seen the future, more clearly than I ever could. "I need to tell you something," I said to Iris. She looked at me with those steady brown eyes, the same eyes that had stared up at me from a laundry room floor 5 weeks ago. "I am restructuring the company. Mercer Maritime and Properties will go private. No more board members. No more shareholders with agendas. No more quarterly reports designed to make old men in conference rooms feel powerful while the real work happens on the docks and in the warehouses and on the water." She nodded. "What does that mean for the employees?" she asked. "It means they keep their jobs. Every single one. Captain Willis stays as Fleet Operations Director. Gloria Vance joins permanently as Chief Financial Officer. And I want you to lead a new division, ethics and compliance. Every contract, every partnership, every hire goes through your office before it reaches mine. I need someone who cannot be bought, who cannot be intimidated, and who understands what it feels like to be thrown away by the people who were supposed to protect you." Iris was quiet for a long time. Elijah stirred against my chest, made a sound like a small bird, then settled. The oak trees along the property line moved in the evening breeze, their branches heavy with Spanish moss that swayed like curtains in a house that had been left open to the wind. "Franklin," she said, "I was scrubbing hotel floors 5 weeks ago. I do not have a business degree. I do not know how to read a balance sheet. I do not know the difference between a profit margin and a loss statement." I looked at her. "You knew Bennett was poisoning me before any doctor confirmed it. You knew Vivian was stealing before any auditor found the trail. You knew the insurance policy had been modified before Gloria pulled the records. You did not need a degree to see what was happening in front of you. You needed courage. And you had more of it on your worst day than most people have in their entire lives." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. She reached over and touched Elijah's hand, his fingers curling around her index finger the way newborns do. Instinctive and absolute. A grip that says, "I am here, and I am not letting go." The following Monday, I met with Howard Ashworth, the Mercer Maritime corporate attorney, at his office on Drayton Street. We spent 6 hours dismantling the old structure and building a new one. The board of directors was dissolved. 3 members who had enabled Bennett's access to company accounts were referred to the FBI for investigation. 2 others resigned voluntarily, their severance packages contingent on full cooperation with the ongoing federal audit. The remaining assets, all $50 million worth of maritime contracts, port leases, waterfront properties, and fleet vessels, were consolidated under a single private holding entity controlled by me alone, with succession rights transferred to a trust in Elijah's name. The trust was the part that mattered most to me. I had spent 3 nights writing the terms with Gloria and Howard. Elijah would receive full access to the trust at age 25, provided he completed a 4-year university degree and worked at least 2 years in a non-family company. If he chose not to enter the business, the trust would convert to a philanthropic foundation focused on maritime education and coastal community development. Either way, the money would serve a purpose larger than one family's name on a building. I also funded 2 separate initiatives that week. The first was a $500,000 scholarship program for single mothers pursuing business degrees in the state of Georgia, administered through Savannah State University. The second was a $250,000 grant to Memorial Health's maternity ward, designated specifically for prenatal care for uninsured women. Dr. Haskell would oversee the medical advisory committee. I did not attach the Mercer name to either program. Catherine would have preferred it that way. She always said that generosity loses its meaning the moment you frame it and hang it on the wall. On Wednesday evening, I drove to the Rittenhouse district and parked outside the house where Bennett had lived with Vivian. The penthouse windows were dark. A for sale sign stood in the lobby entrance. I sat in the truck for 20 minutes, watching the building the way a sailor watches a reef he almost struck in the dark. I did not go inside. There was nothing left in there for me. No memories worth recovering. No objects worth reclaiming. Just empty rooms and the faint chemical smell of a life built on deception. Willis called me as I drove home. "The fleet inspection is done," he said. "All 4 vessels are clear of liens. The loans have been repaid from recovered funds. The Magnolia needs new navigation equipment and a full engine overhaul. But she will be ready by December." "Good," I said. "Because I am renaming her." Willis paused. "To what?" he asked. "The Elijah," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Willis cleared his throat, the way men do when they are trying not to show emotion over a phone line. "That is a fine name, Franklin. A fine name for a fine ship." I hung up and drove the rest of the way home in silence. The windows down, the salt air filling the cab of the truck like a hymn I had forgotten the words to, but could still feel in my chest. The morning I signed the final document transferring 51% of Mercer Maritime into Elijah's trust, the sky over Savannah was the color of pewter, and the river moved slow and silver beneath the Talmadge Bridge. I sat at my desk in the study on Wilmington Island, with the window open and the sound of the water reaching me the way it always had, patient and indifferent and eternal. Gloria Vance had prepared the paperwork. Howard Ashworth had reviewed every clause. Judge Whitfield had notarized the trust agreement personally, stamping the final page with a seal that carried the weight of everything I had fought for over the past 5 weeks. Elijah Mercer. Beneficiary. Age of access. 25. Conditions. A completed university degree and 2 years of employment outside the family business. Contingency. Conversion to a philanthropic maritime foundation if he chose a different path. I read those terms one more time, slowly, letting each word settle into my understanding the way an anchor settles into sand. This was not about money. It had never been about money. 45 years of building Mercer Maritime had taught me that wealth is a vessel, not a destination. What matters is what you carry in it, and where you choose to sail. I signed my name. Franklin Joseph Mercer. The pen was heavy in my hand. A fountain pen Catherine had given me on our 20th anniversary, engraved with the words "Still Sailing." I had kept it in the top drawer of this desk for 6 years, wrapped in the cloth she had used to polish it, afraid to use it because using it meant accepting that she was gone and that objects were all I had left of her. But she was not gone. She was in the will addendum that saved Iris. She was in the garden outside this window, where the roses she planted still bloomed every April. She was in Elijah's face when he slept. That expression of perfect trust that only newborns carry. A faith so complete, it does not yet know the word betrayal. Iris knocked on the study door at 9:15. She was dressed in a navy blouse and gray slacks, her hair pulled back, a leather portfolio under her arm. She looked like a woman who had decided to stop surviving and start building. Behind her, through the hallway, I could hear Dr. Haskell in the kitchen, warming a bottle for Elijah, and humming something low and tuneless, the way she always did when she thought no one was listening. "The Ethics Division Charter is ready for your review," Iris said. She placed the portfolio on my desk and opened it to the first page. "I have outlined compliance protocols for every department. Procurement, contracting, human resources, fleet operations. Every transaction above $10,000 requires dual authorization. Every new partnership requires a background verification through an independent third party. Every employee has access to an anonymous reporting hotline monitored by an external legal firm." I looked at the document. It was thorough, detailed, and uncompromising. It was the work of a woman who understood what happened when oversight failed. Because she had lived inside that failure, had carried its consequences in her body, had scrubbed floors, while the people who were supposed to love her spent stolen money in penthouse apartments and planned their escape to countries without extradition treaties. "This is excellent," I said. There is one more provision, Iris said. She turned to the last page. Any family member employed by Mercer Maritime is subject to the same compliance standards as every other employee. No exceptions. No special access. No legacy privileges. If Elijah joins this company in 20 years, he enters through the same door as everyone else. I stared at that paragraph for a long time. Then I signed it. That afternoon I drove to the shipyard on the east bank of the river, where the Magnolia was completing her engine overhaul. Captain Willis met me at the gate in his white hat and work boots, grease on his hands and satisfaction on his face. "She is ready," he said. "New navigation system. Rebuilt diesel. Fresh hull paint." He walked me down the dock to where the vessel sat in the water, her lines clean and her bow catching the light. The old name had been sanded off the stern. In its place, painted in dark blue letters edged with gold, were 7 letters that changed the meaning of everything this ship had ever carried. Elia. I stood on the dock and looked at those letters and felt something move through me that I cannot adequately describe. It was not pride, though pride was part of it. It was not relief, though relief was there too. It was the feeling of a man who has been sailing alone in open water for a very long time and who finally sees the harbor lights ahead, steady and golden and real. Willis handed me a bottle of champagne. "A cheap one," he said, "because I spent the good stuff budget on her engine bearings." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. A real laugh that came from somewhere deep and shook the tightness out of my chest. I cracked the bottle against the bow and watched the foam run down the hull and drip into the river, mixing with the same water that had carried Mercer ships for 3 generations. That evening, I sat on the Wilmington Island porch with Elijah in my arms, and Iris beside me, and Willis in the rocking chair across from us, drinking coffee from a thermos he had brought from the boat. The sun was setting over the marsh, turning the cordgrass gold and the water copper in the sky, a shade of violet that exists only in coastal Georgia in the moments before darkness arrives. Somewhere out on the river a tugboat horn sounded, low and long, the way they do when they are coming home. I had spent 61 years building things, office towers and cargo routes and port facilities and bank accounts with numbers so large they became abstractions, symbols on a screen that represented nothing you could hold in your hands. I had believed that legacy meant assets, that a man's worth was measured by the weight of what he left behind. I was wrong. Legacy is not what you build. It is who you protect. It is the woman sitting beside you who refused to break, when breaking was the easier choice. It is the child sleeping against your chest, whose heartbeat sounds like a promise. It is the old captain in the rocking chair who never asked for anything, except the chance to do honest work on honest water. Catherine knew this. She wrote it down in a letter, hidden in a safe, trusting that someday it would find its way to the people who needed it. She was right. She was always right. I looked out at the river. The last light was fading. The first stars appeared over Tybee Island, faint and sharp. The same stars that had guided my father's ships and his father's ships before him. Elijah stirred in my arms, opened his dark eyes for a moment, and looked at me with that expression newborns have, the one that contains no judgment and no memory and no fear, just presence, just the simple, overwhelming fact of being alive and being held. I pressed my lips to his forehead. "Welcome to the harbor," I whispered. "You are safe now. You are home."